In today's video, I'm going to create the greatest player of all time and simulate his career. Imagine the speed of the Roadrunner, the sex appeal of Michael B. Jordan, the shooting of Steph Curry, the hands of Mia Khalifa, but the drawbacks are the eyesight of Helen Keller and the discipline of Charles Barkley. Meet Bend Over. So I'll be putting Ben on the Toronto Maple Leafs. He's going to be on one of the most stacked lines in NHL history, which will have Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner on his wings and Bend Over down the middle. Alright, at the end of year number 1, the Toronto Maple Leafs finished with a record of 46, 26, and 10. Alright, so Ben had probably the greatest rookie season of all time with 86 goals, 55 assists for 141 points. Alright, so the Toronto Maple Leafs lost in the second round to the Tampa Bay Lightning. So Ben won the Art Ross Trophy, the Hart Memorial Trophy, the Calder Memorial Trophy, the Ted Lindsay Award, and the Maurice Richard Trophy, all in his rookie season. Let's head into year number 2. At the end of year 2, the Toronto Maple Leafs finished with a record of 57, 21, and 4. Ben had 94 goals, 61 assists for 155 points. And the Toronto Maple Leafs win the Stanley Cup thanks to Ben's 22 goals, 16 assists, and 38 points in 20 games. It's a sad day as Austin Matthews has not re-signed with the Toronto Maple Leafs and only Ben's third year, so we are going to have a very different team this year. At the end of year 3, the Toronto Maple Leafs finished with a record of 54, 25, and 3. Ben had another solid year with 68 goals, 75 assists for 143 points. And the Toronto Maple Leafs repeat as champions for the second straight year. And your Conn Smythe winner for the second straight year is, of course, Mr. Ben. At the end of year number 4, the Toronto Maple Leafs finished with a 51, 23, and 8 record. Ben had another dynamite season, scoring 93 goals, 49 assists for 142 points. And the Toronto Maple Leafs are swept in round number 1, which is fucking bizarre considering they have one of the best teams in the league. Anyways, let's get into year number 5. At the end of year number 5, the Toronto Maple Leafs finished with a 55, 19, and 8 record. Ben had one of the greatest seasons of all time, scoring 112 goals, 82 assists for 194 points. And the Toronto Maple Leafs win the Stanley Cup in year number 5. Ben has his third Stanley Cup in his career and probably the most dominant playoff run of all time with 39 goals, 15 assists, and 54 points. Alright, so I got a new strategy for year number 6. We're going to be putting Ben on every single forward line so he can play the entire game. At the end of year number 6, the Toronto Maple Leafs finished with a record of 58, 19, and 5. And my plan worked as Ben recorded 113 goals, 134 assists for 247 points in 82 games. This dude just lit up the fucking league. And Toronto loses in the third round to the New York Rangers. We are going to continue this 4-line strategy for the rest of his career. And the Toronto Maple Leafs dominated this season with a record of 60, 17, and 5, with Ben having his best season to date with 120 goals, 137 assists for 257 points in 82 games. This guy is an absolute beast. And the Toronto Maple Leafs win the Stanley Cup for the 4th time during Ben's tenure. Ben had an incredible 29 goals and 38 assists for 65 points in 19 games in the playoffs. He would of course take home the Conn Smythe Trophy. At the end of year number 8, Toronto Maple Leafs finished with a 57, 17, and 8 record. Every year it seems Ben is getting better. Scores 131 goals, 133 assists for 264 points. And the Leafs lose in the second round to the Buffalo Sabres. At the end of year number 9, the Leafs finished with a 57, 20, and 5 record. Ben continues to blast his load.
Bro, what are you talking about, man?
On the NHL, scoring 143 goals, 131 assists for 274 points. Ben and the Toronto Maple Leafs win their 5th Stanley Cup. With Ben winning the Conn Smythe, in 22 games, he scored 37 goals, 29 assists for 66 points. With Ben busting a nut all over the league, I'm continuing with this trend to make sure he continues to dominate the league. In year number 10, the Toronto Maple Leafs finished with a 61, 17, and 4 record, while Ben scored 137 goals and had 142 assists for 279 points. Ben and the Toronto Maple Leafs win their 6th Stanley Cup, with Ben winning the Conn Smythe with 38 goals and 42 assists for 80 points in 25 games. Alright, so we're in the back half of Ben's career. He currently sits at 820 games played, 1,097 goals, 999 assists for 2,096 points. At the end of year 11, the Toronto Maple Leafs finished with a record of 58, 19, and 5. Ben continued his dominance, scoring 134 goals, and 153 assists for 287 points in 82 games. And the Toronto Maple Leafs were eliminated in round 3 to the Montreal Canadiens. At the end of year number 12, the Toronto Maple Leafs finished with a record of 55, 21, and 6. Ben scored a whopping 114 goals, 151 assists for 265 points in 82 games. And how fitting, the Leafs lose in the first round in Game 7 to the Boston Bruins. In year 13, the Toronto Maple Leafs finished with a record of 61 wins, 17 losses, and 4 overtime losses. Ben was 3 points shy of 300 points, but he did have 157 goals and 140 assists. But the Toronto Maple Leafs would ultimately lose in the third round to the Columbus Blue Jackets. After year 14, the Toronto Maple Leafs finished with a record of 59, 19, and 4, while Ben had somewhat of a down year, scoring 136 goals, 130 assists for 266 points. And the Leafs would lose in the second round to the Detroit Red Wings. At the end of year 15, the Toronto Maple Leafs finished with a record of 59, 16, and 7. Ben had 141 goals, 130 assists for 271 points. And the Leafs would lose in the third round to the Carolina Hurricanes. At the end of year 16, the Maple Leafs finished with a record of 47, 27, and 8. Ben would finish the year with 131 goals, 114 assists for 245 points. And the Leafs would lose to the Nashville Predators in the Stanley Cup final. At the end of year 17, the Maple Leafs finished with a record of 50, 26, and 6. Ben scored 121 goals, 126 assists for 247 points. And in typical Maple Leaf fashion, they would lose in Game 7 to the Boston Bruins. At the end of year 18, the Toronto Maple Leafs finished with a record of 57, 21, and 4. Ben had another solid year, scoring 144 goals, 137 assists for 281 points. And the Toronto Maple Leafs would win their 7th Stanley Cup during Ben's tenure. Ben dominated the playoffs, scoring 22 goals, 40 assists for 62 points. And Ben would ultimately retire in year number 18. He could not take the grind of another NHL season. If we look at Ben's career stats here, he played 1,476 games, scored 2,175 goals, had 2,080 assists, for 4,255 points. It seems like after his first 4 or 5 seasons in the league, Ben decided to pop off, and he put up 200 points in each of his remaining seasons. Ending in his last season, which might be the best last season by any old player in NHL history, scored 281 points. Ben's playoffs numbers are also off the chart, as he has 811 points in only 297 games played. Also scored 428 goals in the playoffs, which is more than many players score in their entire career. Ben finished his career with 18 Hart Ross trophies, 18 Hart trophies, 6 Conn Smythe trophies, 18 Ted Lindsay trophies, 15 Selke trophies, 18 Rocket Richard trophies, and 6 Stanley Cups. His regular season stats were the following: 1,476 games played, 2,175 goals, 2,080 assists, or 4,255 points. His playoff stats were 297 games played, 428 goals, 383 assists for 811 points. Let me know in the comments below if you created a more dominant player than me.